The newest batch of Dungeons & Dragons spoilers have arrived, and for me, they have answered the biggest question that I had about this upcoming set. And that is, how is Magic going to handle the concept of Planeswalkers in Dungeons & Dragons?
Magic.
I am a wizard!
History.
I'm an old wizard!
The Magic Historian.
My bones hurt. Greetings! Owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends, we are here today for the very enjoyable experience of talking about Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering combined. Like I said a few moments before in the intro, the biggest question I had about the Dungeons and Dragons set was, how do they plan to tackle Planeswalkers, right? Because it's a very interesting concept, and I wasn't sure exactly what route they would go with it, and I have to admit, the option seems to be they will use gods or possibly godlike beings. We'll have to wait and see if other spoilers show that there are different characters that are also Planeswalkers, but in this case, we're dealing with a character who is actually a god, right? And gods are multi-realm style beings in Dungeons and Dragons. They traverse to different planes of existence, so honestly, them being a Planeswalker feels like a genuinely natural fit, which I thought was really sweet. When I looked at this, I went, wait a minute, this is awesome. Like, I genuinely was just thinking of, were they going to use really powerful wizards, or how are they going to do it? But gods are a natural fit. Now, bear in mind, they may choose to do some big, beefy wizards as well, which, you know, depending on who they are, I might be cool with that too. But either way, the god concept is perfect. And the spoilers we're going to talk about today, they all tie together into the same storyline kind of setup. It's absolutely fantastic. I have to say, I'm super excited about these spoilers. So let's talk about the one we've got up on the screen. Obviously, I've already stated that this is a god, more specifically a goddess we're dealing with, and this is Lolth the Spider Queen, okay? So, Lolth is 2 black and 3 for a 4 loyalty planeswalker with the abilities, whenever a creature you control dies, put a loyalty counter on Lolth Spider Queen. For 0 loyalty, draw a card and lose 1 life. -3 loyalty, create 2 2/1 black spider creature tokens with menace and reach. Normally when we get spider tokens, they're piddly little 1/2s, right? And they have reach, but in this case, you're getting 2 1s, and on top of that, they've got menace. So sure, they can block flying creatures, but they're also just more scary to deal with, and that's because they're created by a goddess, which is a fun concept. So the final ability is a pretty nutty one. -8, you get an emblem with, whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage by 1 or more creatures you control, if that player lost less than 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference. That is going to be a little bit difficult for people, not everyone, but some people, to wrap their head around at first, where they go, okay, wait a minute, whenever it's dealt damage, you got to figure out how much life they've lost this turn, then subtract this amount. This card is not sparing on the complexity, but from a flavor perspective, this card is very, very cool. So Lolth is the goddess of the Drow, right? She is the Spider Queen, and the Drow are a race of subterranean evil elves, okay? And they all worship Lolth. She's a super, super evil goddess. She basically rules over them with an iron thumb, and she has them all fight amongst each other under the whole guise of, oh, I'm trying to seek out the strongest to be my champion. But ultimately, it's to keep them distracted and weakened so that she can maintain her stranglehold over them, and they won't start to worship other gods. So they live in this crazy society where the Drow all belong to like these different kind of like noble houses, right? And they will just scheme and plot to overthrow each other, either through political machinations or legitimately just booting down the front door of the house and wiping out everybody who exists in there. And I mean everyone. It's not uncommon for an entire house to get wiped out in the middle of the night, right down to every last child being taken out. So it's a kind of a crazy goddess, well, not kind of, it's a very crazy goddess to be worshiping, right? That leads to a very warped and crazy society. And I love the fact that whenever a creature you control dies, you put a loyalty counter on her, because it totally makes sense. Lolth revels in just endless sacrifice, basically I'm just looking for the most powerful beings, but ultimately also really all I want is control. I don't know. I really like the concept behind this like version of Lolth as a card overall. It feels like it fits pretty well. And actually we have two different variations. So this one, you can see this one makes Lolth look a little more intimidating and inhuman, right? And you can see that there is someone who is in a serious amount of trouble right now. They're literally in the presence of the Spider Queen. She's got all those crazy long hands with claws above, but if you look, there's one that's reached forward like it's like shushing the guy. Imagine a goddess just doing the, you need to stop talking. That is a terrifying situation to be in. And the alternate extended bordered one also shows a pretty terrifying situation. Lolth herself doesn't look as horrifying in this aspect, but there is the whole horrific, like, look at that dude. He's in front, and he is being bound up into spider webs just in this horrific final embrace, right? While she looks down at him impassively with this cold glare. It is pretty intense, right? So, again, love the concept of gods as planeswalkers. Totally works for me. We're dealing with Lolth, the Drow, and the whole like Underdark scenario, which works so well because we're dealing with a story focused around one major character from fantasy Dungeons and Dragons history who is super cool. So the next card we have to look at is Bruenor Battlehammer. So Bruenor Battlehammer is 1 white, 1 red, 2 colorless for a 5/3 legendary dwarf warrior. Oh, he's uncommon. I didn't notice that before. I assumed he was a rare. All right, so he's uncommon. Each creature you control gets +2/+0 for each equipment that is attached to it. That part's all right. It's the second part that actually makes him way more alluring as a card, and that is you may pay 0 rather than paying the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate each turn. So the first time you go to equip one of your creatures, you can go, boom, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and pay nothing for that. And there are some crazy cards out there with some huge equip costs. So being able to do it for free is sweet. And also, it just gives you the versatility of being able to move equipment around more efficiently. If you even just have one piece of equipment and wanted to like basically attach it to a creature, swing, then after the attack, move it to another creature, this is going to make it easier as well. So he's like a mini equipment lord, right? Which is a cool concept. The flavor text says, knew I'd find ye in trouble if I came out and looked for ye. All right, so Bruenor Battlehammer is a dwarven king, and he is tied to the main character. I mean, if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, you know who it's going to be. If we're talking about Lolth, we're talking about Bruenor. You know who the final character we're going to talk about today is, who the big spoiler is. It's pretty exciting. But anyways, Bruenor is basically like this guy's father-in-law. He's a dwarven king who is now friends with the character who's the main focus of this whole story right now. So you know what, let's move on, because Bruenor isn't nearly as exciting as Drizzt Do'Urden. Now you know what I found out today and had no idea about this character is he wasn't really some well thought out character. He was a character who was made up on the spur of a moment, where it's basically like, okay, I'm about to go into a meeting to pitch our book, but we got to get rid of this one character, so I need you to make up, I need another character. And he's just like, oh, okay, it's a dark elf. And the person on the phone was like, okay, what's their name? And he goes, Drizzt Do'Urden. And they're like, can you spell that? And he said, not a chance. And to me, that's an amazing little snippet. If you didn't know that and you're a fan of Drizzt, I thought I'm going to mispronounce his name. Anyways, if you're a fan, I thought you'd get a kick out of that if you didn't already know. So here we have such an epic choice for a legendary creature for Dungeons and Dragons. Like legitimately a fantastic include. Okay, so Drizzt is one of those dark elves that I was talking about. Okay, so he existed in a society that worshiped, venerated Lolth, and like I said, in the middle of the night, you could just be, boom, your house just got wiped out. So he resides in one of these houses. They're constantly at conflict. So not only does he have to live with the fear of what's going on overall in terms of, oh, you know, are they going to come and try and wipe me out in the middle of the night? The bigger problem for Drizzt was the fact that his morals didn't align with his society. So the majority of Dark Elves revel in worshipping Lolth. They like this whole struggle for power and constantly interfighting and things like that. But Drizzt was morally opposed to that, right? He just was, in his mind, it was not the right way to proceed. And actually, his father kind of nurtured that in him because his father resented drow society as well. These individuals, like basically in your house, you would have your pecking order, whoever's in charge, right? And at the top, there would be a matron, a matriarch of the family, and you have to obey them. They're basically like a high priestess and the leader of your household at the same time. So not only are they like the top of your family, but they're also the most connected to your God. So you have no choice but to obey them, right? And they're the ones who plot against each other, fight with each other, send their entire families out to wipe out other families. It's pretty gross overall the way their society operates, right? So Drizzt is morally opposed to it, and at a certain point, he's just no longer willing to go along with what's going on in society. So he refuses to kill a small child, and as a result, he's going to be sentenced to death, but his dad takes his place for him or whatever, and he's essentially forced to like flee for his life. He's not going to be a part of drow society anymore, right? And they all reside in the Underdark. So they're not up on the surface. They're down deep below the earth. They all thrive off this magical radiation that exists down there. And without it, they start to get sicker and weaker, right? So they need to live down there. So what happens is Drizzt ends up having to go and live in like dark caverns and things like that, just deep underneath where he used to reside. So he's off just in the outer wilds of the under earth, I guess you would call it, right? And in that scenario, he starts to deteriorate mentally, right? He starts to regress into a more feral being. So he's sitting there just focused on like hunting and surviving. And he has this little figurine that he can use that summons up an animal companion, right? And that's basically like his only friend and his only real tether to sanity for the longest amount of time. No, I mean, after a while, he starts to make friends with, people like Bruenor and things like that. But overall, a pretty interesting character with like a ton of lore, right? This character has been in a ton of different novels, so I'm not obviously telling you the whole story. And for all I know, I may be slightly misremembering things because I read the novels that featured him like forever ago, right? So I'm just take what I'm saying maybe with a grain of salt. If you're somebody who's a super huge D&D fan and it's just like, oh, you're not pronouncing things perfectly, or oh, you got these details wrong, it's like, that's the way it goes, my friend. It's an old foggy memory. Remember at the beginning, I'm an old wizard, right? So I'm going to use that as my excuse. Speaking of mispronouncing names, when we go through the text of this card, it's going to be the first time that I have ever said the name of Drizzt's animal companion. So let's get into the card. 1 white, 1 green, 3 for a 3/3 legendary elf ranger. And it's cool because he's like an Underdark ranger, and he didn't realize really fully that he was a ranger until he escaped from his underground prison, and he was able to encounter beings who were like, learn the ways of the ranger, and he's kind of like, psh, I already know. Anyways, so he's 5 mana for a 3/3 ranger. He's got double strike. When he enters the battlefield, create Gwenuar. See, that's what I'm saying. So, when he enters the battlefield, you create a legendary 4/1 green cat creature token with trample. Whenever a creature dies, if it had power greater than Drizzt's power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on Drizzt equal to the difference. Now, I like that second ability for a couple different reasons. First of all, it just feels awesome to have your creature grow by any size when you lose other creatures. It's like, oh, nice little side benefit. So mechanically, that feels nice. But from a flavor perspective, the way that it seems to me, like 4/1, the animal companion that he has comes from this magical statue. So it's not like exactly the same as a normal being, right? So he can get knocked back into his statue form. And I think that kind of represents that nature where he's not always available. So making him 4/1 kind of feeds into that. But when he dies, he's got higher power than Drizzt. So Drizzt, his power goes up when the animal companion dies. And as a result, it makes it feel like in the novel, when something happens to that panther, he goes nuts because that's his tether to reality. That's his only companion, the only one he can trust, the only one he can rely on, right? So he just goes crazy and more vicious when something happens like that. And that's how that ability feels to me. And the double strike feels great because Drizzt wields, he's a dual wielder, right? 2 swords, get some, right? So for me, this is really well done. It represents showing up with the animal companion, freaking out when the animal companion's gone, the dual wielding, the elf ranger, the artwork showing him like leaping down 2 swords ready to go, Hoo-yah! And right beside him, soaring through the air, the massive panther beast just ready to rip into whatever that is, some kind of massive mammoth, and they're out in the snowy wilds. Like, dude, it feels so good, right? So I love how all the cards are tied together. Drizzt is literally like the main character. Lolth is the goddess he's escaping the society from and hates, right? And then Bruenor is like his father-in-law. And we actually get to see another style of Drizzt as well with the whole sketch styling. So you can see that they've done this in the artwork style of old Dungeons and Dragons like manuals. And I have to say, as somebody who played D&D back in the day, I love this. I love this so much. This is such a cool choice. Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering together has already blown my mind. Like, everything I've seen has been amazing to me. And if everything goes the way it's supposed to, if you look on the artwork that they have for the set boosters, we're going to be getting Xanathar as well. And actually, I have a lore video coming out today about Xanathar and the magic lore behind, like the Dungeons and Dragons lore for the magic version that will be coming kind of setup, right? So what I'm trying to say is I have hybrid Dungeons and Dragons and magically. Sorry if I seem a little disjointed. I didn't get enough sleep, right? So anyways, I've got lore coming out today. It's Magic the Gathering Dungeons and Dragons lore about Xanathar. So I'll link it here at the end. Come on and check it out. Big thank you to all of my patrons for supporting my channel. YouTube is a wild and wonky place, and you guys give me a little bit of stability each month, and that goes a long way for me. So thank you very much for believing in what I do and helping me to have a great time. So my friends, thanks for being here. See you next time.